Hi, my name is Eric. I'm an undergraduate here at Brown. I major in history, applied mathematics, and Egyptology. And at the Cogut Institute, I'm writing a thesis in the history department. My thesis is all about this collection of really cool texts. Well, at least I think they're really cool. They're from this 4th century Egyptian village called Medinet Madi. And during the 4th century, this is kind of the waning period of the Roman Empire. The texts that I'm interested in are called the Medinet Madi codices, named after the place that they're from, which is Medinet Madi. And the theology that's articulated in these texts is called Manichaeism. Manichaeism was kind of like the public enemy of the Roman Empire, for lack of a better word. Manichaeism was a mixture of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and what we would today consider as Catholicism. The reason it was the public enemy is because Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in 314 CE at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And so ever since then, the empire was all for Christianity, and anyone who wasn't Christian was going to be persecuted, except for there was a little stunt with Emperor Julian who said actually paganism is okay. But for the most part, Christianity was what everyone loved, and Manichaeism was what the empire really didn't love. And so I was really interested in these texts because they're some of the best preserved, earliest instances of Manichaean theological texts, which us scholars have access to. There's about 4,000 pages, and I think it's amazing that we have this treasure trove of information. And I chose to study these texts because they're some of the oldest and best preserved texts that we have on Manichaean theology just ever. And scholars have focused on these texts from kind of a top-down perspective, for lack of a better word, meaning that they are really interested in using these texts to understand abstract theological principles about Manichaeism during the 4th century. And unsurprisingly, you could use these texts to come to really interesting and robust conclusions about Manichaean theology during the 4th century. But I got really interested in this project because I thought to myself, how could we know so much about the theology of 4th century Manichaeism in the Eastern Roman Empire, but know absolutely nothing about the people who were actually practicing that religion? I mean, we know there was a community of Manichaeans in this Egyptian village. We know they wrote these texts, and we know they preserved them in a climate that basically would have marginalized these people for professing such a religious belief system. And so I thought, what are the stories of these people? And my history thesis is all about trying to uncover the story of them. My research has two broad goals. The first is to understand the community of Manichaeans who copied these texts, engaged with these texts, and preserved these texts. And the second is to just provide the historical context that these texts kind of have been lacking. Scholars have kind of been eager to just pluck this text out of its historical context and use it as a way to understand abstract principles of theology, but any historian knows that a text was produced in a certain historical climate by historical actors who had their own intentions, beliefs, and motivations. And so we need to understand what those beliefs and motivations were in order to have a really robust interpretation of the text, in my opinion. I've written 3 chapters of this thesis so far, although they're probably subject to change to some extent. My first chapter is all about the socioeconomic context of Medinet Madi. I tried to establish how many people were there, what were people working on, was this like an agrarian community, was this more of an industrial community, how rich were these people? And then in my second chapter, I look more at the local religious milieu of Medinet Madi. I'm interested in looking at if we have any evidence that there are mainstream Christians in this community, were there Jews in this community, were there people who were professing old pharaonic religious belief systems in this community, because that provides, in my opinion, really important historical context for how people were engaging with these texts. And then in my final chapter, I try to use all this context that I've cultivated to come to a more robust interpretation of one of the Medinet Madi codices called the Manichaean Psalmbook. And I make an argument that kind of shows that the Manichaean Psalmbook espouses a type of Trinitarian theology, which is a mixture of different sects of Christianity and Manichaeism. And by Trinitarian theology, I just mean theology that's about the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So my next step right now is, unfortunately, I have to do a lot of rewriting. My second chapter needs a little more nuance in characterizing the religious milieu of Medinet Madi, and I also need to write my introduction.